We have a few really exciting guests that we're going to be talking with. The first person I'm going to bring up is Pete over here with Billion Oyster Project. So why don't you give him a round of applause? And yeah, that's for you. Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself?
I run a small nonprofit called Billion Oyster Project. We're located on Governor's Island. The nonprofit's about 9 years old, and our goal is to restore oyster reefs to New York Harbor through public education initiatives. So basically train young people through the public school system how to grow oysters, scuba dive, conduct science experiments, build underwater reef infrastructure, and through that work restore New York Harbor to its once vibrant and abundant place that it used to have at the center of this estuary. You guys probably may not know this, but New York Harbor, right, it's 200,000 acres. It's the same area as the land area of New York City, and it used to be full of oyster reefs. It used to be full of fish and whales and seals and diving birds and all these things. And about 100 years after Europeans arrived, we removed all the oyster reefs from the system. So you can sort of think of New York Harbor as a 200,000 acre forest with no trees in it, right? And we're 8.5 million people who live around this ecosystem and just sort of go about our daily lives not running around planting trees. And so what we're trying to do is restore that ecosystem and build it back by training young people to do it.
Super cool. So, and then maybe billion.
Billion
number.
It's a big, exciting number that we think we can reach, but it's going to be challenging to reach it, and we're going to need all of New York City to help us get there. And so it's about setting ambitious goals. But it's also the number of oysters it would take to filter the standing volume of the Upper Bay in New York Harbor once every 3 days. So there's sort of that nice little fact about it. It's also our aquatic analog to the Million Trees. Anyone old enough here to remember Million Trees NYC? So we're sort of this, we view this as the next great, environmental initiative of New York City: restore the water instead of actually restore the largest open space in New York City, which is the harbor.
Did they plant 1 million trees?
Yes, they planted 1 million trees.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So, with your project, with Billion Oyster Project, what are some ways that you've found, or your organization has found, that are effective vehicles to get people who live in Midtown or in an urban setting out into nature, whether it's terrestrial or aquatic? Have you found any?
Absolutely, and that's a core sort of aspect of our work, is connecting people to nature. And I didn't grow up in and around New York City. I grew up on a small island 100 miles from New York City, and it was essentially a rural community. I grew up on the water outside all the time. So living in New York City for me personally is challenging for those same reasons. But the idea that you need to leave New York City to find access to nature is just totally false, right? Some of our staff is going whale watching from Sheepshead Bay this weekend. There's a 22,000 acre national park in New York City that you can get to on a subway. And if you go there, you'll see wading birds and you'll see dolphins, you'll see bluefish and terns and laughing gulls and ibises and great blue herons and osprey, and all that stuff exists right here in New York City. But most New Yorkers identify nature as somewhere you have to go to. You have to leave New York City to get to. So a big part of our work is making that connection for people who live here, that you can, especially the people who wouldn't even think about going out of town to find nature, who aren't even interested or excited about nature, that first experience of coming down to the water's edge, pulling up an oyster cage and seeing a bunch of shrimp and fish pop out of it, and understanding that it's you can break that barrier and it's actually a vibrant, interesting ecosystem right there in front of you.
So rewinding a little bit, oysters. You talked about how much water they filter. What makes an oyster so special besides the fact they're tasty?
I mean, oysters are special for lots of reasons. I'm pretty biased, but an oyster can process 50 gallons of water a day. An adult oyster, the kind that you'd see on a restaurant plate. So that's exciting and interesting, and they can play a role in cleaning up after us. But the main reason, the thing that we're most excited about, is rebuilding the ecosystem. Oysters build 3-dimensional reefs, just like a coral reef. They perform a lot of the same ecosystem services. So filter the water, provide habitat for other animals, stabilize the bottom. A lot of animals eat them. A lot of animals eat their waste that they put on the bottom. So oyster reefs become centers for biodiversity. The big difference between an oyster reef and a coral reef is that coral reef are oases in what are otherwise deserts. The reason you can see so far in the tropics is there's no food in the water. Right? If you're talking about a temperate estuary where we live here in New York City, there's many orders of magnitude more biomass per cubic meter up here than there is in a tropical coral reef somewhere. So oyster reef are the backbones of these ecosystems that are far, far more productive than a tropical reef ecosystem.
So with the billion being this goal, Like, where are we now? Where are we headed? And specifically, how can people in the room get involved?
Right. And our numbers just changed, but we've restored about 31 million oysters, which means we have about 969 million to go before we get to a billion. But we're on our way, and we hope to get there by 2035, but we won't be able to get there without your help. So there's a lot of things you can do to help out. You can come out to Governor's Island and volunteer. We run an education program at about 80 middle schools throughout all 5 boroughs. So if you know a student in middle school or have friends who have kids in middle school or know a teacher, get those teachers and students involved in our work. They can sign up on our website. We collect shells from 80 restaurants in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So if you're eating oysters at a restaurant, make sure they're collecting shells. And if they're not, go to a different restaurant that is collecting shells and support them and thank them for collecting shells. We do a ton of events throughout the year, socials at restaurants. We have a few big fundraisers. So look us up online and come to those. And we have a new membership program. So you can be a member of Billion Oyster Project, and it's one of the few membership programs that actually pays for itself. So for $150 for a year, you can be a member, but you get free half dozen oysters at a whole bunch of our partner restaurants 5 times a year. That adds up to more than $150. So you can do that, and if you eat oysters, it's a lot of fun to go to those restaurants with your coupon and get a free half dozen oysters. And you can do that online too, become a member.
Wow, that's super cool.
Lots of different ways.
That's amazing. So for people in the room, one of the things that I would love you to share with us is, like, what are some things folks here can do to be better stewards of this incredible ecosystem that's just offshore?
There's definitely things that we can all do to minimize our negative impact. But I think, and we think at Billion Oyster Project, that it's much more, and everyone should do those, right? We should all be recycling and composting and thinking about our energy use and things like that. But I think it's much more exciting to think about the ways that we can rebuild the ecosystem, that we can restore the ecosystem. And that's, so the best thing you all can do, obviously, is come out and join us and try to restore oysters to New York Harbor. But there's also other things, you can take care of there's so many other ways to get into nature in New York City. There's people here from Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy. You can go fishing programs, kayak programs. There's, the Baylander on the Upper West Side, Ira Gershenhorn. He's one of our favorite oyster research station maintainers. You can go up there and learn all about the animals at the Harlem Piers. So I think the most important thing is building awareness and affinity for the resource where we live. And so go out and get on the harbor, get in the harbor, get under the harbor, and start experiencing the ecosystem that's right here in New York City.
That's awesome. Nick, do we have time for like a question or two, or just roll through? So the question is, do the oyster shells, do they put them back in the harbor?
One of the reasons there's no oysters in New York Harbor is because we removed all of the reef substrate, the material from the harbor. Oyster larvae swim around in the water, and then when they're ready to go through metamorphosis, they attach to a hard substrate and then grow their shells and become what we think of as oysters. Historically, traditionally, they would have used oyster shells for that. Without hard substrate, billions of oyster larvae fall out of the water column in New York City every year and find nothing but mud, so they die. So one of the things that we need to do is build back that substrate, and we use oyster shells to do that. The only place you can get oyster shells in New York City is from restaurants. Ordinarily, they would have been thrown away, but through our shell collection program, which is run by Maddie and Charlotte, who are both here, we've collected, I always give a bigger number than Stu, but about 1.5 million pounds of shell. So 1.5 million pounds of shell has been removed from the waste stream, and a lot of it's out on Governor's Island, and we'll return it to the harbor covered with live oysters to rebuild the reefs.
Awesome. Well, Pete, thank you so much. Everybody can pull out their credit cards and sign up right now.
Thank you,
for
guys.
The Billion Oyster Project. Thank you.